is going on, guys? Rogue TCG here for another Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG deck profile. You all voted for it, and I am here responding. Here is the updated version of my Musket Fiend Smith brew. Now, this deck is not cheap. It is not cheap in the slightest. The Musket cards have spiked since Fiend Smith has released, and Fiend Smith is, well, Fiend Smith, so the deck isn't necessarily the cheapest thing in the world. However, in my opinion, it's a lot of fun, and if you did want to just play test with it online, I would recommend trying it, just because I think it has a very unique play style compared to other decks, even at this meta, and even compared to past metas. This is a very strange deck, however, I think it's very competent in its own regards, and can definitely hold its own against the metagame. So I'm just gonna stop yapping and let's get into the deck. Starting off our list, we are on Fiend Smith, so our Fiend Smith engine is going to include triple Fiend Smith Engraver, being able to pitch itself from hand in order to get a Fiend Smith card straight from deck, spell trap related. And then in the graveyard, it basically does everything you could ever want. This card is literally everything for the deck, and we have to play 3 copies of it, so we are going to be playing 3 copies of it. Next, we're on triple Fiend Smith Sanct. This card, specifically in this deck, is quite strong. It is a spell card which is relevant, and once we get to the muskets, you'll see why they are relevant. Spell cards in this deck are incredibly valuable, and we want to be able to activate them whenever we really can. We don't really want a condition to have to be met to activate our spells, so Fiend Smith Sanct is very powerful, being able to just special summon a token to our side of the field, and then its float effect also can come up, so it is just a recursive card, so we are playing 3 of it. We are on triple copies of Fiend Smith Tract. Every single one of our muskets are light fiend, so this basically adds any light fiend from deck to hand, and then we need to discard a card. This adds any magical musket from deck to hand, which is crazy. It's a spell card that triggers our magical muskets, and then it's poly for Fiend Smith only cards in the graveyard. Rest in peace, Creamer. But we are still playing 3 copies of this regardless, because it is just reinforcement of the army for archetype. One of the other cards you can add off of it is our last Fiend Smith cards. I'm going to say that in quotes, Fiend Smith. Here is the 1 copy of Fabled Lurry. When it's sent to the graveyard, when it's discarded, we get to just special summon it out. This discards the card that we have to discard, so, you know, sometimes, and by sometimes I mean most of the time, we're going to go in Tract to add Lurry, and then discard the Lurry, and then special summon the Lurry, and it just turns Tract into a spell card extender for a monster, which is great. Now onto our muskets. Before we go into muskets, I did want to give you all some context before we get into it. First of all, we're on triple copies of Link into the Vrains. Now this card is a card that most people haven't seen before, so I'm just going to give you the rundown. This card has 2 different effects. The first effect allows you to special summon a monster from your hand, and then immediately using that monster and monsters you control, Link summon a monster, and your opponent can't interact with the summoning of that Link monster, so no like judgment or anything like that, and they can't respond to any effects that activate on the summon of that monster, namely the monster's unsummon effects and any other chains that you might make before you activate that unsummon effect. Its second effect says if this card's in the graveyard and a Link monster is destroyed by a card effect, you can banish it and add a monster with the same type as that Link monster from the graveyard to your hand, which is relevant because we are playing Unchained cards, so we can be popping our own Links in order to grab any Fiend back from our graveyard. But the main thing is making our Link monster unrespondable to. And the main reason I wanted to mention that is because of this card, Magical Musketeer Max. Now, if you don't know what this card does, it does everything for the deck, and this is the main reason people will be playing this deck if they are. This card reads, on Link summon, depending on either one of 2 things, monsters or spells and traps your opponent controls. You can choose either monsters or spells. If you choose monsters, based on the number of monsters your opponent controls, we get to add magical musket spells and traps from our deck to our hand, equal to the number of monsters they control. So that's pretty good. Typically that's going to be between 2 to 5. And then the second effect for spells and traps is the same, except we get to special summon magical musket monsters from deck with different names up to the number of spells and traps our opponent controls. So again, that can be 1 monster or that can be 5 monsters. It is good in both scenarios, especially if our opponent cannot respond to it. So Link into the Vrains is very powerful, and it allows us to basically win the game right underneath of our opponent's nose if they are unaware of what we are attempting to do. So we are definitely going to be playing 3 copies of Link into the Brains, and we can use that because Magical Musketeer Max is a Link 1 monster. We can use any musket from hand in order to do that. Speaking of muskets from hand, let's cover our main deck muskets and what they actually do. We're on triple copies of Magical Musketeer Caspar. All the muskets are going to have a column-based effect. They have an effect that activates if they're on field as a monster, and there's a spell or trap that's activated in the column, either on your side or your opponent's side. They get to activate an effect. Caspar allows us to add a magical musket card from deck to hand, except for the one that we activated in column. So if we activated a musket card in column and then activated Caspar, we just can't add that same one we activated underneath of it. But this card is incredibly powerful, and then all muskets also have the effect where we can activate the magical musket spells and traps straight from our hand as if they were set in our back row, which turns all of them into hand traps, which means we don't have to set them, and the moment there's a musket on board, if we have any spells or traps in our hand, those are immediately live. So consider it like having set back row that only need a musket to be activated, and the back row is always in your hand. It's really crazy, and this deck did it before Runic did. This deck did it before Runic did. This is where this came from, not Runic. But this deck is super cool because of that interaction, and it makes your opponent play in such a way where they're focusing on things that they never had to focus on before, except for, I guess, Infinite Impermanence specifically. But this deck is super cool because of that, and it can really throw some people off. So we're on triple Caspar, and then we're on triple Magical Musketeer Starfire. This one's column effect is a special summon a musket from deck and defense position. Being able to summon muskets is crazy, especially since this one, summons Caspar, so that's the main target we're going to be using for that. So we're on triple Starfire because it just translates into another one. It's a free body, and since we are playing Fiend Smith, the deck does kind of want to spam out Link material, so Starfire does really assist in that. We're on double copies of Magical Musketeer Dock. This card's column effect lets us target a musket card in graveyard other than the card activated in column, and then add it right back to our hand. It allows us to basically have a loop going on. If we have Dock and Caspar, we can activate a spell card under Caspar to search a spell, then add a spell or trap, and then activate that spell or trap under Dock to add back that first one we just activated under Caspar. Now, all the musket spells and traps are hard once per turns, but this does mean we have basically an infinite loop of just recurring resources over and over again, and all of our spells and traps are just very powerful. So it really is going to be outgrinding our opponent just by denying them their resources while gaining resources ourselves. That is our main win condition, is the grind game. We're not really looking to win in one turn, although we do have the ability to. We're looking to outgrind our opponents, and only very specific decks have the ability to outgrind us. So we are on double Dock just to make sure we have access to him. And then we're on one apiece of one copy of Magical Musketeer Calamity and one Magical Musketeer Kid Brave. Now, these two people do not run. The reason I am running them is because we need more musket names in the deck. I don't want to play additional copies of Dock because the effect can get very repetitive, as well as I need more muskets in the deck because the musket spells and traps only function if we have a musket on field. So that means we need to play some less savory muskets. Calamity is Monster Reborn, but reborns them in defense position when a spell or trap is activated in column, but only for muskets. And then Kid Brave allows us to pitch a musket card and then draw 2 cards. So it's like a little bit of a Pot of Greed-like effect, which can come in handy, but we do need a musket to discard that we are willing to part with. So these two are just not as good as our other muskets, but notably Kid Brave is our largest musket at a whopping 1600 attack points. Now, onto our musket spells and traps, and now you can really see what I mean when I say the quality of spells and traps, especially given this first one. We're on double copies of Magical Musketeer Last Stand. This is a counter trap that we can activate from our hand that negates and destroys a spell or a trap card, period. It's a hard once per turn. This card is incredibly strong, be able to just basically cap off a chain while also interacting with your opponent at a spell speed that they're most likely not going to be able to respond with. So this card is absolutely crazy, and I want to be playing 2 of it because ideally, if we're going second, I open a musket plus some quantity of magical musket spells and traps in order to functionally act. Like I said, I have back row in my hand. Even if I'm going second, at the moment I normal summon a musket, all my back row is online, which is great. Then we're on double copies of Magical Musket Cross Domination. This is like infinite impermanence, but a little bit different. Instead of negating the column, it negates a monster face up on field and then changes the attack and defense of the monster to 0. Now that also means it can be activated in the damage step, because it is a quick play spell. So this is not just infinite impermanence, but it also is attack modulation, and in such a high degree where it just turns it straight to 0, which is very strong and allows us to get over problematic monsters while also interacting with our opponent. We're on double copies of Magical Musket Dancing Needle. I believe in a pro play game someone described this as DD Crow on crack, and I very much agree with that statement. This card allows us to target 3 cards in either player's graveyard, up to 3 cards in either or both players' graveyards, and then banish them. That's the end of the card. In this format, when people want cards in the graveyard in order to keep their deck functioning, this card is crazy. This card, especially against Runic as well, they activate their fountain to shuffle back cards in their graveyard, banish all those Runic spell traps, they're never accessing those cards again, and they don't get the draw, which is very powerful. We're playing 2, but this is we're putting the 3rd one in the side deck, but this is also a very easy cut from the deck when we're doing our side decking, or if we think we're going to be playing against decks like Mimighoul or Kashtira or stuff like that, then this card is definitely not as good. And then our last 2 Magical Musket spell traps. We're on 1 Magical Musket Despacito. It just pops a face-up card on the field. Really good at outing floodgates. Since we are playing Dock and Caspar, we can get that loop and use Dock to keep on recycling this, so we're not too concerned about playing multiple. While these ones we really want to be seeing, this one's more one we want to be searching. And then our other last one is 1 copy of Magical Musket Crooked Crown. Now you notice this is a continuous spell. We can still activate this from hand with our muskets, and essentially what this is it's an extra extender. During either player's main phase, we can special summon a musket from our hand to our field, and then lock the zone adjacent to it that our opponent controls for the rest of the turn. That's the monster zone. It's only for the rest of the turn, so it's not really too relevant, only against specific board states, I'd say. However, the main thing is this is an extender from hand, and allows us to play around stuff like Nibiru, around if our opponent wipes our board, we have this in the back row potentially to just summon a musket out of hand to get all of our spell and traps back online. If we choose to link off a musket during our mainline combo, and we know we have a musket in hand and Crooked Crown, before we link off the musket, we can activate the Crooked Crown from our hand, and whenever we want to turn back on our musket spells and traps, we can just summon the musket straight out of hand to do so. I think this card is a very powerful card, specifically the way I play the deck, and you might you might see how I play the deck, because after this profile I am going to be showing some dual replays. But that's it for our Musket and Fiend Smith specific cards. Now all I have is some non-engine or mini engines, I'd say. We're on double Forbidden Droplet in order to out problematic board states, especially against Mimighoul. This card is an instant win condition, so I think it's very funny. We're on double Triple Tactics Talents in order to mitigate hand traps or just effects our opponent activates. And this deck is a blind second deck, although with the Fiend Smith cards, it does allow this deck to have a very, very powerful time going first. And essentially what that means is we're a deck that can go first, but prefers to go second. So if we win the coin toss, this is my theory for the deck, we always go first if we win the coin toss to make our opponents assume that we are going first deck. Then on the second game, they're going to make us go second, and we can just side for going second like we normally would. And then they'll realize we're going second deck, or we have the ability to go second, or we side in those going second tools. And then game 3, if we actually lose that second game, we then choose to go second again. So our opponent has now sided to go second, all they're going second tools when they're going first, and then now they have the ability to just brick and not make a good board anymore. So that's my theory for this deck. They also have the ability to improperly side, which can also mess them up. So I think this deck, just in existence and the way it can play, really plays in a way that some Yu-Gi-Oh players might not necessarily grasp at full value initially. And then of course we're on 1 Called by the Grave for more hand trap mitigation. Lastly, we're on a very small little engine here of double Foolish Burial Goods and one copy of the Black Goat Laughs. Foolish Burial Goods can send the Black Goat Laughs, however it has primary targets in this deck being two other cards, being Fiend Smith Tract and Link into the Vrains. Both of these cards have graveyard effects, Tract being a poly while in graveyard, and then Link into the Vrains allowing us to fetch back a card if a Link monster is popped, which we can do ourselves in our mainline combo almost all the time. The Black Goat Laughs allows us to basically call the name of a card while it's in the graveyard, and then effects of the special summon monster cannot be activated while for the rest of the turn. So this card specifically needs us to know what our opponent's deck does, and if you know me, I know what a lot of decks do. I know a lot of different decks and their main choke points, so I have a very confident feeling about this package, especially given that it can pivot into any one of these cards if we draw this or we don't think we need it. And then lastly, we only have 3 more cards in the deck. We're a Fiend deck. We are playing Unchained Soul of Sharvara, and if you did watch my last Musket profile, you notice this is going to change. One copy of Escape of the Unchained. Before, this was Chamber, where we could special summon Unchained back from graveyard. However, I believe Escape is just better, being able to pop cards, trigger our Into the Vrains, as well as actively removing cards from our opponent's side of the field. Although more than likely we're not going to be activating it, just the threat of this existing, I believe, is more than enough. And then our final card, this is a little bit of a funny card, and it's probably going to be cut by the time I bring this deck to a regional, is going to be one copy of Majesty's Fiend. Our deck, in theory, does not need monster effects in order to function. The effect of our muskets, in order to allow us to use our spells and traps out of our hand, is an inactivated effect. It is a continuous effect that just applies. And Majesty's Fiend does not negate continuous effects, it only negates activated effects. So in theory, if we can get to the board state where we have a musket on our side of the board and a Majesty's Fiend on our side of the board, that should be a game that we are most likely going to be winning on, let's say, like Kaiju or Fiend, and then like Droplet or Musket. This is an incredibly powerful card and just hoses certain strategies, as well as this is a light fiend. Let me try and get that to focus. It is a light fiend monster, which means, I just mentioned it, but Fiend Smith Tract can search this card straight from our deck. And given that we are playing the Fiend Smith Sanct, this also gives us a free token to tribute off for Majesty's Fiend. Given Majesty's Fiend cannot be special summoned, it can only be normal summoned. But that's it for our main deck. I know this was a little bit of a longer deck, main deck profile, just because I really wanted to go in depth with these cards. But now let us head to our extra deck. In our extra deck, we're on double copies of Fiend Smith Requiem, able to just summon the Fiend Smith straight from deck. One copy of Fiend Smith Sequence, we're only playing one fusion target for it, so it's just here in order to make that card if we choose to make it, or as well as to bait out an Infinite Impermanence or Effect Veiler. That's it for our Fiend Smith links. Now we're on double copies of Magical Musketeer Max. The reason we're also playing 2 Requiem and 2 Max is because I do not want our opponent to look at our extra deck and rip one just to basically prevent us from playing our deck for the rest of the game. So playing 2 and 2 means that we can also play against our opponent's preconceived notion on how the Fiend Smith deck is supposed to look and the amounts of cards we need to be playing in it, and we can kind of undermine their expectations and catch them by surprise. And catch them unprepared too. You saw the Unchained cards. We're on 1 Soul Lord of Yama and 1 Unchained Soul of Rage. Unchained Soul of Rage is quite literally just IP Masquerena for this deck, where we get to make an SP using our opponent's cards, which is incredible. Speaking of which, we are on the 1 copy of SP Little Knight. This card is also very powerful in this deck because Magical Musketeer Max is a Link 1, just allowing a very easy SP Little Knight if we choose to go that route. However, Max is a light fiend, so we can just make Requiem with our Magical Musketeer Max more of the time than not. Another reason we're playing 2 Max is because very frequently we need an extra light fiend in graveyard, and Max is a light fiend that we can always make turn 1, even though it doesn't do anything turn 1. We can just recycle it back into deck when doing our combo. Run 1 Muckracker from the Underworld. Being able to summon any fiend back from our graveyard is a very great pivot tool, as well as protecting our fiends. I think this card is a very good utility card, although if there are better cards that come out soon or that catch my attention soon, I believe this is probably one of the more cuttable cards in the deck. Run 1 copy of Mech Knight Crusadia Avermax. During testing, I did notice that this deck does lack a certain, I want to say boss monster, but a card that protects itself while also being a threat to your opponent. And I believe Crusadia Avermax is probably an appropriate card to put in that position, primarily because very frequently we are on the board state where we have Unchained Soul Lord of Yama on field and Fiend Smith sequence on field, and we want to take full advantage of the sequence and have it in graveyard before equipping it to our disarray. So in order to do that, we can just use these two to make an Avermax and do it that way. So that is just a potential line that we are able to do. And then for our last link monster, Light Fiend, run 1 White Woman Jump Scare. This card is very strong. This allows us to out the most problematic cards that our deck typically does not have outs to. So like Red Eyes, think Red Eyes Dark Dragoon, the Addy Nister Big Fuckface. Like we can really utilize this card, and this card does come up frequently, as well as it's on summon. It just negates all monsters your opponent controls forever. That's a permanent negate. Like while that negate, it won't like go away after the turn. It stays around. And the Monster Reborn negate, like the effect to negate cards that would special summon from the graveyard, is also incredibly strong on this card. I very much like White Woman, and we are playing it. Run 1 copy of Necroquip Princess, and then 1 copy of Fiend Smith Disarray for our 2 fusions. You notice the fusion count has gone down significantly. That's because they banned my boy. They banned the Creamer, which is really unfortunate. So this is what we have to do. We're playing a Necroquip in order to make sure we can get a Link 2 with our Fiend Smith open, and then we're on the Disarray because we, can make it. And then our last 2 cards, run 1 DDD Wave High King Caesar. Of course, you all know it. It's a Fiend deck with 6s. We can make it. This is an incredibly powerful card. 2 Recloses is great. And then lastly, 1 copy of Constellar Ptolemy M7. Now, this card is really nice in this deck. In this deck specifically, we really want to be seeing our Tract. We really, really want to see our Tract, more so than the Snake Eye build of the deck. So the idea is that, in theory, we can go Fiend Smith, and then all we need is a Fiend Smith on field and a Requiem in graveyard, for example. We go Fiend Smith on field, equip Requiem onto it. Then we go into Necroquip Princess using these 2. We can recycle this Requiem to bring back the Fiend Smith. We can go into Ptolemy M7 effect to add back a card from our graveyard to our hand, detaching the Fiend Smith, and then adding that same Fiend Smith back, discarding the Fiend Smith, and then finally adding our copy of Fiend Smith Tract. Now this doesn't just add us a reinforcement of the army, but if we have a musket on our side of the field and we really need a spell card in order to activate that musket's column effect, this also grabs us a spell card that we can immediately activate to do that. But that's it for our main and extra. I do just want to very, very quickly go over our side deck, just because I think it is relevant in this deck because there are a lot of cards you can take out, namely our Majesty's Fiend and our Unchained cards. But let us just cover it real quick. Run a Bestial package, 1 Lubellion, 1 Magnamut, 1 Druisworm, and an additional Magnamut search target of 1 Fantastical Dragon Phantasme, just because people are link summoning and this card is very good against SP Little Knight. Run 1 copy of the Branded Regain to pair with that Bestial Lubellion. This allows us to really win against grind games and allows us to basically have I don't want to say an insta-win button, but an incredible card if we can land it and stick it against Runic. This card forces a negation, or not necessarily a negation, a pop out of them. They have to get rid of it. They really do. Or else every banish, we're just drawing more cards and putting our muskets right back into deck. Rod 1, Feather Duster in order to clean up back row. It's also a normal spell, so we can activate it in column of musket. Triple Dark Ruler No More. It's a card we can activate in column of musket and just allows us to break boards. We don't need to kill our opponent. We just need to put them in a position where they can't win the game anymore. And then we're on additional musket cards of 1 copy of Cross Domination, 1 copy of Dancing Needle, 1 copy of Despacito, and then 1 copy of Last Stand. If we're against a back row heavy deck or a very spell focused deck, Last Stand, the 3rd copy, really comes in clutch. If we're against a deck that needs their field spell or needs a continuous spell face up on field, Despacito is crazy. Graveyard decks, we got Dancing Needle, and then monster heavy decks, we got Cross Domination. We can pick and choose what amounts we have in our deck very nicely, so we can very easily tech out our deck in order to have an optimized chance of beating our opponent, which I think is super cool with this deck, that we can side in our board breaking cards just because they're so findable in archetype. So we are playing with those 4 cards, and then our last 2 cards in our side deck are 2 copies of Cosmic Cyclone, just to remove field spells without activating any destruction related effects or getting around stuff like Hugin of the Runic whatever. That's it for our main extra and side. Now let me throw you over to the other version of me, who's currently playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Omega. Show you a list over there, just showing you the list again and showing you the full price, and then we're gonna hop into a game or two. Alrighty, well here we are in Yu-Gi-Oh! Omega. I'm just gonna, show you the list real quick. We got the Engravers, the Luries, the Fiend Smith, all the Musket cards in here. You can see we're at 489 on the main deck, 154 on the extra deck, primarily which being carried by Espinus Little Knight, and then 45 on the side deck. I believe Basilubellion as well as Cross Domination and Last Stand are primarily carrying that price tag. Oh, definitely Jerusalem as well. But let us hop into these 2 replays and let me just walk you through them. Alrighty, well here we are in our first replay. You can see we open Magical Musketeer Starfire, the Black Goat Laughs, 1 copy of Foolish Burial Goods, which we have our target right here in hand, which is really unfortunate. 1 copy of Dancing Needle and Majesty's Fiend. Our opponent's on 40 cards against our 42. Let's see what we're able to do. So immediately you're going to start off our turn. We're going to normal summon our Starfire. Then we're going to activate Foolish Burial Goods, send Link into the Brains from deck to graveyard. We're going to go Starfire to special summon Caspar straight out of our deck. We're going to go into Max just for an extra material. Go Max into Requiem and Requiem into Fiend Smith. Then we're going to go Requiem target. We're going to go into Necro Equip. We're going to go Engraver and Graveyard to special summon itself. We're going to use these 2 to make our Yama. We're going to go Yama to add our Soul of Sharvara. And now I'm going to pause here for a moment. You did notice earlier in the turn we sent our Link into the Brains. We had 2 different options here. We could have went our Necro Equip and our Engraver to go into Constellar Ptolemy M7 in order to grab the Fiend Smith back to do that sort of line. But here I'm opting to get our Unchained cards into rotation in order to trigger our Link into the Brains in order to grab our Fiend Smith back. And you'll see how it's going to happen. We're going to go Sharvara, pop our Yama. We're going to into the Brains to add back our Fiend Smith, then Fiend Smith in hand to add Track to hand. They could say, oh, we're missing a material. Well, now we go Tracked underneath Caspar to add the Lurie. Then we discard that Lurie, triggering our Lurie Chain Link 1 and then Caspar Chain 2 to add our Last Stand, which is a Spell Trap Negation as a counter trap. Then we're going to summon our Lurie, make our Rage. Sharvara is going to trigger, setting Escape the Unchained, and that is also on. Then we're going to set our Black Goat Laughs, and then we are going to pass. So our interactions we have available to our opponent is we have Caspar that can search a Musket Spell Trap if we activate something in column, so that's whatever we search, that's an interaction. We're on 1 Last Stand, which is a Spell and Trap Negation, that's an interaction. We're on Dancing Needle, that's Banish 3, that's an interaction. We're on the Black Goat Laughs, which is an interaction where we can prevent our opponents from special summoning a card from the extra deck with the name that we list, that's an interaction. Escape the Unchained can, in theory, pop a card our opponent controls, or we can go Unchained Soul of Rage in order to link off for an SP. So Rage is 2 interactions, while Escape of the Unchained is also 2, because if we pop our Rage, pop our card of our opponent's control, we can then go Yama, since a card we control is destroyed, to then bring back that same Rage to just do the same line over again. So we have a lot of varied interactions on our board, even though it looks pretty small. And then on the follow-up, we also have our Majesty's Fiend, and we kept our Fiend Smith in the graveyard. So let's see what our opponent's on. They go Runic Tip in draw phase. They go Hugin in draw phase, pitch another tip to add a Runic Fountain. We allow that to happen. We don't really mind that all too much. They're going to go Fountain. They're going to set 3 cards. Before they try and end their turn, and go SP to banish a random card. They're playing Stun. And we go, okay, we're going to hold this Last Stand until they activate a card that I absolutely cannot let resolve. But at this point, we're sitting pretty good. They have 1 card in hand, which is unknown. These both are unknown.
but we do know we have unanswered to one of the cards they have, as well as having a pretty alright board state regardless. So we move to draw phase. In draw phase, they go runic tip. We allow it. We're just going to negate whatever they use off of tip, ideally. They get to banish one card. They're going to go, here they're going to go fountain. They're going to target all 3 copies of tip in order to shuffle them back. And then we're going to say no. You're not going to activate any more copies of runic tip for the rest of the duel. Fuck you. So we banish all 3 of their copies of the runic tip. They chain goes in match, which is very strange. Locking us in only 1 attribute. I'm like, okay, well, we're going to lose our SP Little Knight. And then they go runic flashing fire to pop our SP Little Knight anyway. Like, that was the card we were planning on keeping. So they would kind of minus there, but that's completely fine. They did activate the goes in match in column, so we can go Caspar. And then their last card was Tikaboo, so we had to negate that one. And then we add another last stand off of Caspar, since that wasn't what was activated in column for our next turn. We're then going to go Fiend Smith to special summon the Fiend Smith back. We're going to go into max to summon 2 muskets straight from deck. We're going to grab Doc and Kid Brave. And then we're going to swap this to attack. We're going to equip that onto Requiem. And then I did miscount. This is actually 400 off of lethal, unfortunately. A little bit of a blunder on my part. I was expecting Creamer to assist me, but our opponent did just rage quit after that because they are aware that there is nothing that they can do to win because we have a spell trap negate and we have a monster negate, and if the moment we activate one of these, we're searching more interactions. So that was our first game. Now let's take a look at our second one. Now, this is a version of Musket that I was testing before I came to the conclusion of my current build of Musket. The only card that is different in this build of Musket is that it's missing our Mekk-Knight Crusadia Avermax, and instead there is a Cross Sheep in place of it. If you were to play Cross Sheep, which is a very, very powerful card in this deck specifically, I would recommend cutting either, again, that Avermax or the Muckraker from the Underworld. That's just my personal preference. That's my 2 cents. I'm just explaining why you see a Cross Sheep in here, although in the very end it doesn't actually really change the course of the game all too much. Our opponent's on 40, we're on 42. They're playing Mimighoul, they're going to go normal dragon, add room here. Then they are going to activate, sorry, not room, they're going to add Maker. They're going to special summon an Archfiend to our side of the field, and then they're going to set one and pass. Very underwhelming, but that's what Mimighoul does best. We're going to go Duster just to pop their Tikaboo. We're going to go Engraver. They're going to Ash that. That's cool. We're going to go Regained in case they have like a Bestial of some sort, because this is game 2. We're going to go Max. They're going to go Mourner. Then they're going to go Maker to flip up our Archfiend. Then that allows us to pitch our Lurie. They get their Archfiend back. We get to make a token. We're going to go into Requiem into Fiend Smith Engraver. We're going to go into Engraver effect in Graveyard. We're going to make a Cross Sheep with those 2. We're going to go into an Necroquip. That does trigger a Cross Sheep, which allows us to summon our Doc right back from our graveyard. And now we are in like a little bit more of an advantageous position. We have more monsters on field than our opponent does, including a Necroquip Princess. We're then going to use those 2 into a Fiend Smith sequence. And then that's going to be able to fusion summon into a Desiree. We're then going to equip that sequence onto that Desiree, and we're going to pass it over to our opponent. If they pitch anything, we get to draw a card, and then we do have 2 negations, and our opponent sees the writing on the wall and surrenders. But thank you all so much for watching the video, if you still are. Thank you so much for our member. We have 1 member on the channel as of right now. Thank you, Ari. Your support is greatly Thank you, Ari. Your support is greatly appreciated. And if any of you wanted to become a member yourself, stay tuned. I have details on it in all of my end cards. But thank you all again so much for watching, and I'm going to see you all later. Bye-bye. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. If you wanted to talk to more Yu-Gi-Oh! Players like yourself, I would highly recommend checking out our Discord server. Link is going to be in the description, as well as the QR code on screen. We do talk somewhat frequently about Yu-Gi-Oh! And the current meta, so I would really enjoy to see you there. As well as we do recently now have channel memberships available on our YouTube channel, where we have 3 different tiers. We have Super Supporter at $2 a month, where you get loyalty badges, emojis, guaranteed comment responses, a shout out at the end of every video, as well as access to the members only Discord channel, where you get early sneak peeks at future videos. There is the Giga Supporter at $5 a month, where you have early access to all new videos about a day or 2 before they go up, as well as all the previous offers. And for $15 a month, we do have our final tier, which is going to be Femboy Fanatic. You get a guaranteed customized video every single month, as well as 1 hour of my time. Could be for anything you'd like. You want a duel? Absolutely. You want me to help build a deck? Absolutely. You want to play some Helldivers? Sure. I'll do anything for an hour once a month. But supporting does help me out quite a lot, and it does help me produce all of these videos. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll be seeing y'all later. Bye bye.